Two arguments from Prime Minister. First of all, people prefer to suffer until they cannot go back. The second argument, double punishment to those who don't have resilience. But before the couple of clarifications, first of all, what this debate is about and what in what context this debate takes place is, for example, this take place in, for example, workplace, and people value like workers with like how they are resilient to like long working time, or how they are resilient against the harassment and so on. And and the people like for example, consciously or unconsciously, they value their own employee with resilience in the qualitative like valuation and so on. Or for example, this can take place at school, for example, in valuing like kids or educating kids to like for example stand against the a lot of like work study or like hard like practice in the club activity and so on. Then, what counterfactual we support? We support counterfactual. We support the norm of like the counterfactual that where the people are like believing the norm of giving up. This norm like have the two implications. First of all, the first implication here is just, it's okay to leave when you like feel impossible to keep, or when you feel you cannot stand against some like issues you are facing. For example, it's okay to focus a quick job when you feel like the amount of like a task is too much for you, or is unreasonably too much for you. Or for example, when you're harassed, it's okay to like leave from the kind of environment without like, for example, blaming yourself and or like putting responsibility on yourself, not like your boss and so on. And also we support the work this uh and we like assume the world where like people don't really care about the experience of quitting. For example, like when you are seeing job applicants and so on, the people do not like unnecessarily like devalue the applicants who have a lot of experience of like changing job and so on. But second, the implication of norm of giving up is to like focusing on like making some system to fix issues. For example, like without blaming like for example, in the workplace of like having a lot crazy amount of tasks, the people are not blaming particular person and for not having like some particular ability, but people much more focus on the system of the workplace, and the people try to fix the management of like the amount of tasks for to each like individuals and so on. The reason why this is more likely is because like obviously the corporation have incentive to keep like employee longer, because they don't want to like pay much more cost to hire next people. And also then what they will do is, for example, have a like adequate like labor management. For example, they limit the working time, and they like require their own like company require the manager of the company to like politely they report the like situation of their own workplace or their own group and so on. The framing here is that like I don't think this will be done in horrible extent. That is the people like suddenly quitting when you feel like the pressures slightly. I don't think this kind of things will happen, because anyways people cares about their own livelihood. Because therefore I think people to some extent try to stand against some like difficulties, but they will quit, they will leave when you feel it's too much. But second reason why this won't be done with in a horrible extent is because the people still cares about how they are seen at like next life stage. For example, when you become when you try to like when you なんていうか apply to the next job, or when you for example want to enter in university and so on, they themselves have like a good incentive to like do some like なんていうか do some do some effort for their own interest. First argument, people prefer to suffer by themselves. The first assertion I want to prove is that like people feel pressured or want to do the overwork despite opposition's possible framing that you don't do hard work to the extent you will burn out. Why is this unlikely, and why people will burn out? four reasons for this. The first reason for this is because individuals don't have metric to value themselves. Because if by themselves, if they are already in danger or not, because there's literally no qualitative like metric, visual like a qualitative metric for yourself, and also like each person have a different like the capacity of like physical and mental people, each people have different like physical and like psychological like capacity, right? Therefore it's impossible for them to like value themselves. But second reason for this is because people misvalue themselves based on the story of like your boss or influencers and so on, and because you're like you are constantly exposed to like story of with the spy bias, or for example old story, which necessarily fulfilled with the brave story of the past, the horrible working environment and so on. And even if you consult your boss or your next older generation, they will say, it's like so natural for our generation, you should like keep like making effort and so on. But third reason why third reason for this is because other people cannot notice your situation, right? For example, at office, when you are like, for example, asked if you are okay by your manager, but you are not okay. But you cannot say I'm not okay. Why? Because they care about your validation at the workplace, and therefore I think it's impossible for other people to notice your situation. But fourthly, even if you consult about your situation, surrounding people are not supportive because they themselves are told by by their own manager that you should like stand, or they themselves have experienced this to stand against that kind of situation, right? Therefore, people won't be supportive to you. But fifth reason for this is because you failed the bad evaluation, right? Because evaluation. Then what will happen? The impact here is simple. First of all, you will overwork and you will have the bad mental issues, which never cure fully. But second impact here is the prevalence of harassment, because the people that devalue people who are harassed, not the people who harass. But third reason for this is because you okay. But on counterfactual, we have more standardized labor regulation, and we are more open to like we have more open environment to report harassment or illegal work. We don't overwork.
Thank you for the speech. Before continuing to the next speaker, reminder that the maximum speaking time is 7 minutes and 15 seconds. More than that, I will not write anything down. Now, I'm calling upon the LO. Here.
Hi, am I audible in this for you?
Can you speak louder, please?
Oh, okay. Is it good now?
Yeah, better.
If you cannot hear my voice, please let me know. Maybe in chat. Thanks. Right. Firstly, do the characterization of this narrative. Firstly, how this narrative looks like. I think it looks like praising people who are resilient as, that struggle is very hard, but you're impressive that you're enjoying this situation. I think these kind of like characterization is likely. When firstly, I think it is mainly created through the speak up from the people that speak up their struggle in the, for example, social media or stuff like that. This looks like despite being a single mother, I work in a nurture my children, etc., etc. I think this scenario is likely to happen. But secondly, I think it was also co-opted from the perspective of the privileged people. They can feel good about yourself when they can perceive themselves as those who are listening to others. So I think this kind of scenario, how this narrative looks like, likely. The second thing is that main target of this narrative likely to be the marginalized people who are more likely to experience unavoidable hardship in their life. But sadly, how this narrative is likely to internalize the people. Firstly, it is not dichotomy. I think rather gradation that certain portion can be related to their story. So i.e., I think even if you cannot fully align with the situation that posted on the social media, it is likely that they can seek further relation into how this narrative empower you. But secondly, I think it is, even if it's not internalized to the full extent, I think you're able to weaponize this narrative to empower yourself. I think these are the characterization of this narrative, how this is likely. I think it's also killed the government side characterization to the government side characterization, that's how the extreme version of the resilience, like sexual harassment or exploitation, is unlikely to happen. I don't think governments are able to prove why this is a likely characterization. Having said that, two argumentation coming from Prime Minister. Firstly, why individuals are likely to be better off by this narrative? First thing to prove is that this is simply going to be hope for the people to have the hope for people that they can believe that something good is likely to happen after after overcoming this struggles. For example, single mother child graduate university and give back to you, etc., etc. I think these kind of like hope that they have is able to empower and support you mentally in the process of going through the struggle. But secondly, I think that you are also able to self-glorify yourself. For example, like I'm resilient right now. That's awesome. I think that these kind of self-glorification is only available under the glorification of this resilience. I think it's I think you're also able to get the glorification from others because precisely because there is a glorification from regions, I think that others are also likely to praise you about you are very good or you are awesome that enduring the situation. I think it's also able to give, you're also able to feel good about the situation. I think these kind of a scenario are able to prove how people likely to get the hope from this narrative. This is particularly important because I think there is a struggle that oftentimes unavoidable, which was the mischaracterization, missed by the government side in terms of characterization. For example, human relationships that are already based. For example, lifetime experiences like entrance exam or job hunting. For example, like financial situation, or for example, structural problem, related to like races or discrimination, etc., etc. I think in that instance, these kind of having hope or having the narrative that support you are pretty much important, which is likely to be which is absence in their cyber paradigm. But even if it's like avoidable part or like avoidable struggle, like a choice that government side contexted, it is still good to have the resilience because having resilience or resilient or having a challenge makes you grow up. So I think simply this narrative are able to benefit you. Second thing to prove is how situation likely to get better by this narrative. Firstly, I think you can get knowledge and skills over time when you stay in the struggles. For example, how to balance work and childcare. I think this kind of scenario likely to happen when you're staying that when you go through and you don't give up in that situation. But secondly, I think you are also able to improve in the step by step. Because I think there's going to be more option to resolve the situation. This looks like not even if you cannot be elite, but stably stably putting food on table or putting food on table or sending children to the school. I think these kinds of like step-by-step improvement are likely to be available in a cyber paradigm. Or also like taking a step to counselor for trauma. Counselor for trauma resolvement rather than keeping it in your mind, etc., etc. I think these kind of steps of step-by-step improvement or resolvement uniquely happen in our cyber paradigm. Besides, I think it is more you are able to feel more accepted from others and more open to speak up your situation, which is basically important to gain the support or gain the community. When they are placed to be resilient, you can feel welcoming community to accept what you're currently experiences rather than trivialize how awesome being resilient is and be blaming why you didn't run out. I think this is a likely scenario of how you are likely to be accepted in a community, or like how your struggle likely to be accepted. I think in the process of creation of glorification, as I characterize, people necessarily understand how hard situation is, and also like form the empathy that they are the people who are suffering and people who are going through the struggles. I think it's unlikely to put further burden, but more likely to align with these kind of people, welcome these people, and likely to provide a support or provide a community for them. For example, this leads to the further like movement to improve the situation that are currently in, or for example, like they are likely to be the hope for them to have are able to feel good about having the community that you are accepting. I think these kind of scenario are only available in our cyber paradigm. How the comparative looks like, I think the comparative is like the government side talked about, yeah.
If people are proud of having worked hard, of having persevered hardships and troubles, why would they want to change the situation?
I'll answer it later. I think the comparative, the narrative looks like land out from the situation. I think this is bad because firstly, I think this is a more likely, more easy narrative that are more unnuanced that is bad for them. I think it is likely to be more dichotomy whether or not they will leave from the situation or not. But I think but I think that it's hard for them because oftentimes they cannot avoid from a situation or avoid from struggles as I explained. So I think that compared to step-by-step improvement as I explained on what you can do in that situation, I think it is far better narrative that you can align with. But secondly, I think in the comparative, like, the narrative like run out, people can blame that's not escaping from a situation. You don't have to examine the exact situation to say just run out. I think it is a worse situation for them to course that worse situation that they cannot have the narrative to support you, or they cannot have the narrative. They can also pressurize this by the narrative that you have to escape, or you're unable to get the community that you're supporting. I think this is significantly harmful in terms of like mentoring or having community creation. Proud to oppose.
Thank you for the speech. Now I'd like to call upon the DPM here.
Hey, am I audible now?
Yes, you are.
Thank you. So 3, 2, we believe that resilience is a quite masculine and requiring too much narrative that conceals every single people in the survivor set biases. So it conceals the systemic problem as an individual responsibility, and so that is why that push too much for the individual and reduce the public and social support for the individual. So we proud to propose this motion. Today I have two things to say. Firstly, so why this narrative is unable to access to for the based on a minority basis, and secondly, why in our paradigm for the minority it is easy to voice up and it is easy to access for the public or like systemic support in our paradigm. So firstly, why resilience narrative is less likely to be accessible for the minority. They said about yes, so it is very helpful narrative for the minority because for the single mother, so I'm so proud to be like raising my children by my power or so on. So that is why that incentivize the individual to raise their children by themselves or so on. But it is mostly inaccessible in three reasons. Firstly, they are unable to follow the hard work because of the limited of the biological capacity or social conditions. If you can raise a children, one children, it is difficult to raise two children or three children or so on. So it is depend on the individual situation, and it is difficult to apply in the universally for the narrative. And secondly, the same these identity label, so some identity label as not resident. For example, so for a single women inside of the workplaces, if women have baby inside of workplaces, these women are more likely to be labeled as that in resident person inside of the workplaces because they cannot offer their most of the time for the work requiring work or so on. So they are more likely to be de-evaluated inside of the workplace. And thirdly, the discrimination inside of the minority group are likely to be happen on their side of the house. So because if you fail to raise their children, then you are likely to be discriminated by the same groups of single mother and say, hey, you are not so not so makes decent effort for raising children or so on. So since this narrative conceals the every individual's specialized condition, then so these minority who are unable to make too much effort to raise their children can be the target in the same minority groups. they said about so these inside of minority groups, people are likely to be help each other. But how that inside of the SNS community, people can like so save each other. So most likely like savior, most likely offer for the support offer for these individual is that so you're a single mother. Yes, I'm same, and I'm very proud to raise my children by my own hands. So I can do that. I can do that. So you can do this, or so on. So this kind of like support narrative cannot so practically help these children so condition. So we think that that conceals the problem as an individual responsibility. We think that is bad. Why that is bad in 3 cases? Firstly, so it is so. Simply, people mentally ill. So this narrative force people to hard work and also exceed their own capacity. That is leads to like burnout. And secondly, unable to get choices inside of the workplaces. So since some people are labeled as incompetent or irresilient inside of the workplaces, or like masculine with the masculine requirement, so these people are unable to get chances inside of the workplaces or get good evaluation scores inside of the workplaces. And thirdly, so they are silencing their voices. If the people really need to help for the access to the public help or corporate management help inside of workplaces, these voices are easily be eliminated inside of workplaces or public conditions, because so these voices are more likely to be targeted as yes, so you work hard, yeah, I can understand that, but so I also do that, or you can do this, or so on. So that is why these kind of like self-responsibility narrative so overwhelmingly conceal that individual problem inside of the like both public spheres and working conditions. We think that these systemic problem can never be solved on their side of the house. Why in our side of the house people can get better opportunities in 2 ways. Firstly, since so giving up is a decent choices on our side of the house, people can quit easily before they burn out. So that is why the people can more rely on the public help or your family help or so on. So that is why the people can so stop doing work hard before you reaching your own limit. And secondly, these like so evaluations or like chances can be more properly treated inside the workplaces, because if you're minority and so raising your own children, then since company do not require any resident inside the workplaces, just estimating the number of tasks inside the workplaces. So that is why these so chances, so more like proper chances can be offered to the minority group. And thirdly, inside the minority group, that giving up can be like tolerated. Since the inside the minority group that currently they do so, since they are in the same situation or background, they are more severe to the own like groups of people, because they more visualize their own they are so proud to be raising children by my own hands, but still they on our side of the house, since these minority groups can be more tolerated, so that is quite beneficial. So simply that systemic changes are required, because these so overworking problem is a management issue, and since the people are silencing inside of the like non-management layers, that problem cannot be visualized. So in our side of the house, these problems are more visualized, and so people can more offer more. We proud to propose.
Thank you for that speech. I'd like to call upon DLO. Here.
Okay. Sorry, just a moment. Okay, cool. Pronouns she, her. Just stand up if you have any POIs. Okay. So starting in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, I want to clarify that the running away narrative in and of itself is not accessible to many people. Because I think that the thing here is that most hardships are really hard for people to escape. Because when they say that, on our side, we're just gonna like have like structural problems, I think it's really the same on their side. And this is one the point in which their like solution doesn't really like come to power. Because like when oftentimes like structural reasons are, for example, like poverty, or for example, like, you know, misogyny, or for example, like patriarchy, etc. It is really hard for these individuals to escape from like the common, for like the, you know, the very basic like fundamental cause of this, especially when it comes to poor people. You cannot just escape from the job because you have like the sunk cost. Maybe you cannot find like a new job really easily because of like you have human relationships, etc. So for these reasons, I think like most hardship that they want to push is not really escapable in the first place. But I think like as opposed to that, I think the resilience narrative can be accessible to a lot of people. I think what Masabe tells you is to say that they say that it's going to like depend on situations, thus it's not really accessible to the people. I don't think this makes sense, because I think like because it depends on situations and people are put into like different situations, there's demand for a lot of like resilient like stories from all kinds of amount of people. People are likely to more speak up because they feel that they are likely to be listened to, meaning that a lot of like intersectional like people are likely to speak up in their situations. I think these kind of stories can be also diversified into like ranges of like extremeness, from like, you know, small stories such as my boss was a bit mean to me, but I was able to like speak up for myself and just say something back to them, etc. I think these kind of things are likely to be available because like people, well, the situation that they put in are really different. Because of this fact that the diversification is likely to happen, this is the reason as to why maybe women have like babies towards workplace are not going to be disregarded, because people acknowledge that people are like suffering in their own way. And the second thing I just want to quickly clarify is that I don't think discrimination is likely to happen within the community, because I'm not sure as to why like people are just going to point like, you know, fingers at people who are like actually suffering as the same as you. Even if maybe the extent is different, I think they can share kind of some knowledges. As opposed to that, I think like the running away narrative is really inaccessible for people, because the ultimate goal of running away is to say that it is the best if you can like physically escape from this, and this is like the ultimate goal of maybe the running away. This is where like diversification does not really happen, because like if it's like, you know, just enduring, you have like a lot of means, as I said before, but when it's like running away, the answer is yeah, you should just like physically run away. I think like they say that we can like access to public health, maybe they can report. I'm not sure the likelihood, as I will explain later, but also I think this doesn't really mean that this is like a fundamental solution of like, you know, facing like your struggles, meaning that I think these kind of public health and like access towards this is likely to be disregarded compared to maybe like people who are able to physically run away, who are likely to be glorified as hero on their counterfactual. Moving on. Why people are not likely to be being burned out? I think like in the extreme case, this is not likely. It's like physically impossible for people to like actually, you know, continue working. I think that there's like basic labor laws to like protect people who are like mentally ill, regardless of this like narrative, regardless of maybe like how the process of people are likely to speak up. If people are mentally ill in terms of the outcome, people are like the like government is likely to stop it. But the second thing here is that I think people are likely to be more less likely to be burnt out, because I think they're able to have like knowledges and have more coverages in terms of like hearing how people endured it is going to be available, because like there's a lot of stories, and I think like resilience comes with like how the people have suffered. You're likely to find some stories which are maybe accessible to you. Moving on to why resilience is the prerequisite for actual change to happen. Because I think Yuta-san's logic is to say that, when you escape, people see like the problem, thus there's going to be a change. The first thing I want to question is that I'm not sure as to how people are likely to detect like the problem when they run away, right? Because I think the ultimate like gist of their logic is to say that, well, people should like run away from like the problem when in order for like their impact to stand. I think like the people are required to not really look at the problem in the first place, because it causes maybe like a severe kind of a mental sexual harm towards them. Meaning that I think like even if they have like sexual harassment, they just like maybe takes like some distance away from like the boss. They're just gonna be like, I don't want to maybe work with the boss anymore. And I'm not sure as to how people have like the strength to actually look at the problem and report. And in the first place, they say that reporting your boss is likely to be hard on our counterfactual because you're going to be regarded like as irresponsible person. I think I'm not sure as to how much this narrative is going to affect in terms of the criteria or like the metric of how people assess each other, because I think like the ultimate like logic as to why you're afraid of like speaking up to your boss is because your boss controls like your how you're being credited and how much salary you gain, meaning that even in that counterfactual, even if they want to escape, and even if maybe they're able to report it, and even if they have like some sort of places that they can report to, you're going to be afraid that your boss is going to know that they have reported you, and like they have like maybe like emotions which are they have like bad emotions towards you, meaning that I don't think like this narrative becomes a tipping point in which like people feel like really set back towards like reporting people. Yeah, but the second thing here is that I think being resilient doesn't just mean that they just like shut up and just be there. I think like as seen in like past social movements, I think being resilient means that maybe like speaking up towards patriarchy, not really escaping for that, facing like the problem in and of itself can be also like claimed as like a resilience. People like these kind of hero stories. I think this is also available on our counterfactual too. Lastly, I just want to add on like positives as to why structural change is much more likely to happen on our counterfactual. We say that social movements are likely to be empowered more uniquely on our counterfactual, because on their counterfactual, I think what is likely to happen is that social movements are more likely to be silenced, because I think it's just easy for the privileged to point out and be like, well, you see a problem, why don't you just like run away? I think it's really easy for like the privileged to frame you as an irrational people who are like maybe worse, like wasting their efforts into like like going against maybe the majority. I think, and also I think accordingly to this logic, I think speaking up is going to be really hard on that side of the house, because they feel like an immense amount of guilt that it is my problem that I cannot like escape from this like this structure right now. Maybe I'm irrational of like not being not like running away, but I don't really have much means to it, so I'm not sure how this can do. On our side, I think under the narrative of resilience, it's just easier to like create like a common enemy, that they are the ones who are pushing against like burdens to us. Thus like we should not really run away from them. There is no way from running away to them. Like we should like stand up against them. I think social movements are also likely to be listened more because of like Hinano's logic, right? Because like people generally like how people are suffering, how like the story of people suffering, and then like being able to overcome that. I think this is likely to be more listened to on their counterfactual too. Summarizing, I don't think like they prove as to how this like running away narrative is like accessible for people, when like the problem in and of itself is structural. We say that people have to endure it, and it is better if they can glorify it. Yeah, opposition.
Thank you for the speech. And now I'd like to call upon the government whip here.
Okay. これってビデオついてなかった？ついてない。あ、オッケーオッケー。じゃあ大丈夫です。Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. In a world where resilience is seen as a virtue, people actually actively seek suffering because they think it adds value to their personality, because they think it's important for their personal growth. They make it sound like resilience nullifies suffering in the end because you get used to it. Yes, you get used to the habit of suffering, but you never get used to suffering itself. Suffering is always a suffering, and that's why we preferred a world where suffering was not the norm. Firstly, I want to talk about how you change the environment, i.e. how you achieve structural change, because this is where we think we clearly win this debate. The first thing that they say is that after success, people are likely to seek change. For example, if women become successful, they want to change the structure. 3 responses. Firstly, people are proud of having suffered. People are proud of resilience on their side of the house because they see it as it was necessary for them to be for their success. That means they're likely to positivize the framing of their suffering, and therefore they don't have the incentive to look the suffering within workplace as something that needs to be changed in the first instance. Secondly, it is difficult for these people to suggest that suffering was a suffering because that contradicts their stance. They said people are glorifying, resilience. People glorify the experience of having suffered. If this is the case, they cannot turn back and say, I was actually suffering at workplace. I was actually suffering having to, because I had to raise a child while I was working in the company. This means they're unlikely to be able to make this a problem in the first instance. But lastly, there's a huge asymmetry in the way people see the experience of suffering on their side of the house. People who have succeeded know that they've succeeded, which means they were able to overcome the experience of suffering in the first instance. For many other people, it is not as easy as these people that were actually able to succeed in the end. This means that there is a mismatch in the perception of suffering between the ones that are successful and the ones that were unable to be successful. This means they're unlikely to understand the feelings, understand the suffering that people go through on the ground. For all of those reasons, these people are unlikely to actively seek change under their side of the house, even if as an individual they are able to become successful. People don't voice out under their side of the house. People think of resilience as important. That's why they maintain this structure into the future. Why is our world different? They don't engage with our comparative, which we talked to you about from Prime Minister's speech. I want you to imagine workplace like Google, workplace like Meta, workplace within tech industry, for example, because that's exactly the norm that we support on our side of the house. Quitting is okay because there's no premium on resilience itself. There's no premium in being able to suffer and grind through the end within a workplace that is exploitative. This means that structure changes on the outside of the house because people will leave your company insofar as you're exploitative. People will leave your company insofar as you have to work hard and work 12 hours every fucking day. In education as well, the teachers will no longer expect you to, do a lot of homework, stay within class, even after school, for example. All of these things mean that the incentive of these corporations, incentive of schools change because they want you to work. They want you to have a happy, working life insofar as that is important for you to be motivated within that space. There is also an environment that allows you to speak up, that allows you to consult your bosses, consult people around you insofar as you experience something within workplace that you did not enjoy. This means that the incentive that corporations have, the incentive schools have in wanting you to feel comfortable, for example, within that space, allows them to introduce policies, introduce mechanisms that allow workers to feel happy within that workplace. And I think that's the reason why we get change on a structural level on the other side of the house. Their claim was that, bosses are scary anyways. Yeah, obviously that is true. But you don't really have to talk to the boss. You have, consultants, you have outside third-party people that you can talk to when you need therapy, for example. They also say structural problems don't change. There is always discrimination, for example. Yeah, that's also true. But obviously, it becomes far better on the other side of the house because even majority want to work 8 hours instead of 16 hours. And that makes it easier for single mothers, for example, to work within companies as well. There is a significant amount of trickle down to people that are minorities, people that have to suffer within the discriminatory structure. I want to now talk about why on the other side of the house, people are more likely to be successful as a minority. Because their claim is that, minorities will be successful because they have access to stories of resilience. I really don't understand why, stories make these people able to succeed insofar as the focus of those stories is on suffering and positivization of that suffering. Whereas on the other side of the house, you have more stories about the actual suffering itself. But I would like to, give you reasons as to why people are more likely to be successful on the other side of the house. Firstly, they are likely to be, stronger and more resilient than the majority in the absence of the majority culture of glorifying resilience. Why? Because poor people often have stronger underlying motivation of wanting to be successful. They're more likely to be naturally resilient because they have poverty experience. They have experience of having to, make do with what little they have in everyday life. But secondly, environment improves on the other side of the house, thereby reducing the need to to be resilient in the first instance. It is far easier for single mothers to work if you're not expected to be in the company for 16 hours every fucking day. That's why minorities are far more likely to be successful on the our side of the house. The comparative on the their side of the house is far worse because there is a significant expectation on minorities to be resilient when it is very difficult for them to be resilient. Like, not everyone can raise a child and work 16 hours every day, you know? But secondly, structure is ever less friendly on the their side of the house because there's significant prejudice, significant stereotypes to do with minorities. Minorities are demanded of even more than majority, and that makes it even harder for minorities to be successful on the their side of the house. So on the our side of the house, minorities are better off. Before I move on, yes. Okay, I want to talk about mental support because this is the last thing that matters in this debate. We obviously win based on structural change, but let's engage with this as well. Their first claim is that, you can self-glorify, you can be praised by those around you on social media. I have two responses. Firstly, for majority, it is actually worse and counterproductive. It makes their lives worse because for majority, that cannot be resilient as the person that's, posting this on social media. The feeling that they get is one of inferiority. The feeling that they get is one of self-blame. I can't be as resilient as this person that have made a post on social media. This worsens the experience for majority of individuals in society. But secondly, it is difficult for these individuals to, access support as well, because insofar as they're glorifying themselves and glorifying their character of resilience, like, they can't get out of it. They can't be suddenly like, it's actually tough for me to continue working within this corporation. So it makes it harder for these individuals to escape suffering in the first instance. Obviously, on the our side of the house, you're more likely to have access to mental support because insofar as, you're not seen as a coward if you quit your job, if you talk about being overworked and how, that is a suffering for you, like, you're well supported. That doesn't exist on the their side of the house when people see that as a taboo. For all of those reasons, we get better structural change, we get better mental support, and that's why we win this.
Thank you for that speech. I'd like to call up an opposition whip here.
Okay. Am I audible? Seems like yes.
Yeah, but can you speak a little bit louder? Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. First about structure and change. Second is about the minority and marginalized groups with people. Last thing is about, like, the companies burnout, these things. Firstly, structural change. They said in outside house, people have no incentive to voice out about their problems to change the situation better. I think it's very, very unlikely assertion because insofar people have basic incentive to improve their life, they want to get more incomes, they want to get more healthier system or these kind of things. But secondly, also people are inclined to otherwise the responsibility of the suffering to the others, such as a structure in the society, such as a corporate structure. Therefore, the movements or the politicians often propagate their, often like voice out their policy for the structural changes existing in a society. It is not the fault of you, but it's fault of the society. These types of movement is likely to have gain popularity in both sides of the house. What they said next, they said, if the situation of suffering is glorified, why you want to change the situation? Obviously, this like actual situational change and materialistic benefit
overweighs your emotional like catharsis. You will be glorified by the other people's for these kind of things. But what we are saying is this emotional catharsis is what we only can only we can give to like these types of most vulnerable groups of the people in the society. Also, they said like the suffering is not regarded as a suffering. No people are likely to regard suffering as like I have overcame these massive amounts of suffering, so I should be glorified. I am resilient. These types of narratives very likely to spread. But secondly, they said, okay, so I think if anyway people are likely to voice out about their problem, what's the tipping point of a structural change? We have already pointed out. Majority of society are more likely to listen what you're saying if you are regarded as legitimate actor who are glorified and enduring about like daily stresses, and that's why you have legitimacy to voice up for like an increasing amount of the income, so these kind of things. Otherwise, you're likely to be regarded as a lazy person or just a stupid person who chose the fucking kind of condition and fucking kind of jobs, and you should just run away or these kind of things. That is why I think more structural change is likely to happen in outside the house. But I think more important thing is about the minorities' self-affirmation. They're coming from basically the Deputy Prime Minister. They said they have three structural reasons. Firstly, minority people are unable to like reach out to this narrative because like, the narrative requires very high standard. I think the narrative is recalibrated to your own situation, such as even you have the mental struggles, even you have such as like psychological disease, you raise this one fucking children or you are now going to company. This achieving normal fact is very, very like incredible considering your situation. These types of recalibration is very, very likely. Second thing they said is identity itself is labeled as a resilient, as not resilient person, such as female or these kind of things. I think more glorified you are, the more information spreads, and the more information to glorify even the niche types of glorification, such as a female, is also the resilient person with these types of information. It's more likely to spread when the narrative spreads and when more people have incentive to be glorified and when more people have incentive to post about their daily suffering in the social media. Last thing they said is discrimination inside a minority community. I think it is very, very unlikely because the people in the specific community, such as single mother community, have incentive to ensure the community as safe space for their last result for the mental escape. Because I think if you like bully some person, like you only just raised one child and you raised two child, maybe the next target would be the single mother who like raised three child might bully you at the next point of time. You want to ensure this community are safe by not counseling other people because this is the cause of the next types of the discrimination you might get. That's why you're very unlikely to do such a thing. But note, then like the reasonings is a bit worse. Like minority might get more affirmation, but might not get more affirmation. But here's the deadlock breaker. Minority suffering is more visible and understandable for the people. You are living in the fucking poor condition without no like high paying jobs. You have to raise 2 or 3 amount of the children. This struggling condition of the marginalized groups of the people is more likely to be easily visualized by the societal factors. And that's the reason why the minority are likely to get like more mental mentally good factor in outside the house. Next thing they said is minority people are easily voice out. Minority people are very difficult to voice out. The first thing to point out is we have already explained minority people is easy to voice out when they can expect a glorification coming from the other peoples. But second thing is even if this point is worse, minority people have difficulty to voice out in both sides of the house. In outside the house uniquely, the outsider people, external people have incentive to find you as a resilient because you want to find the examples that you can assimilate with. You want to know how to be resilient as this person by picking and choose the most relatable examples in your family, in your like workplace or these kind of things. That is why minority affirmation is more likely to be available even if the voice out is a wash because the other people would find you more in outside the house. Next thing, but I think this is the most important point and maybe more important than structural change. Why? Because it's immediate and certain. Maybe structural change requires certain amount of the time or requires certain political capital and maybe some like lobbying coming from the big company happens. However, this mental benefit that you are the good person, you should be glorified. These types of mental like the benefits would be, I think it's over. Okay, yeah.
The most vulnerable minority won't say I've overcome suffering. They'll say I'm fucking depressed. I want to quit my job. These are people who are seen as weak and worthless on your world. Isn't it better to live in our world where we support those people that are suffering the most and express their
I
depression?
think if they post their daily life, that ordinary people can relate it to be related and say like, oh, you are enduring this condition. Complaining is just a usual factor or these kind of things, and just like think not important thing in a while. So, but the thing is, structure compared to the structure change, direct immediate benefit for the psychological benefit is more like direct factor to determine this one. The next thing other thing they said is a burnout, but as we have already explained, compared to like the people who can change the job, this is less like the vulnerable minority groups of the people is more important. But more than that, I think they said like surrounding people would not accept you, but surrounding people have mutual sabotage incentive, because if the other people are taking less, you're more easily to take the less, and that's the reason we also when maybe rush. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for the speech. Now I'd like to call upon the opposition reply. Here.
Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Firstly, I just want to clarify what the narrative looks like on both sides of the house, because I think they have kind of a weird one-liner analysis towards the opposition counterfactual. When they say that because they were resilient, they are not going to speak up because it admits that they were suffering. Yeah, I think that's our whole point. We say that resilience means that you were suffering, but you were able to like endure it. You were able to in a hard situation, but you were resilient. You came over like all the ops that you were. I think even if maybe you don't really speak up when you are maybe suffering, I think at least like afterwards, after maybe like the hardship has gone, or maybe like after maybe some kind of like bad things were comparatively gone, I think you're likely to speak up a bit because you know that you're going to be glorified, you know that you're going to be admitted. I think this is likely, but I'm not sure, even if I do take their case, I'm not sure as to how glorification happens in the first place then, because when there's like no story to glorify, how the fuck do you glorify like, you know, resilience in the first place? It's not like you glorify the concept itself. Thank you. Concept itself. I think like stories need to be there. But the second thing is that I think like rather on their counterfactual, I don't think like speaking up is likely, because when they say that the best thing to do is just run away in order for them to achieve their psychological impacts, the best thing to do for them is to not face like the trauma that they have done, because according to their logic, like not really like running away, like putting away distance is in and of itself is good. Therefore, like I don't think like victims are likely to speak up. Even if they do, I think it's going to be like a really, really marginal case, for example, like therapy, etc. Last thing here is that I don't think they engage with like the diversification coming from our side, which the nuance was to say that I think on our side, there's going to be immense amount of diversification because a lot of people are suffering in a lot of like different instances. Enduring can mean a lot of different things for people to people, but on that side of the house, I think like the solution is unified. It means that like in the ultimate goal is to say that like running away physically is the most important thing. I think like the how they are likely to endure it is likely to be unified on their counterfactual. Then moving on to the more practical, why change is likely to happen in our side of the house. The government logic is to say that like when people want shorter working time, people can leave. Thus, like people can realize that like the people can just realize that this is actually the problem. I think the intuition they give is kind of weird, because when they say like, for example, companies as Apple's and Google, I don't think they made the system out of like the government counterfactual narrative, but because of the fact that it was like maybe like decreasing productivity, let's say, or the sake of like the mental health for like the people. I don't think like the like drop in terms of productivity, the drop in terms of QOL is likely to be achieved by like speaking up, but also achievable in other kind of means. For example, like how well did they're doing in their sales. I'm not sure as to why this profit is likely to be unique on that side of the house. As opposed to that, we provide you a unique like counterfactual as to say why the enduring is the very prerequisite for the people to actually speak up and see the problem. Because the government counterfactual is going to be like, well, if you're like having like a problem, you should just run away from that. If people are able to run away from it, what's the problem with that? I don't think like they are likely to say like solve like the fundamental cause on their side of the counterfactual, especially when the prime minister characterized that running away happens not so really casually. Yeah, but on our side of the counterfactual, what is likely to happen is that I think people are likely to feel sympathetic towards like what enduring that they are going through, because I think like enduring oftentimes includes like stories of struggles, etc., which people can generally relate to, or people can easily imagine, as Yuichiro has already characterized you. Even if we don't win in terms of the societal structure, societal change, we win in terms of emotion, because we have already characterized you that in the majority of the cases, people can just not escape from like jobs, for example. It is really a high cost for them, especially when it comes to women or minorities or poor people. Then I think it's far more better on our side if people can just justify themselves for the emotion that they hold and say that they're doing actually a good job, whilst on their counterfactual, they're going to be blamed continuously of not being able to like run away. They're going to see it as their problem, not like the society's problem. On our side, I think we have a common enemy. Opposition win.
Thank you for that speech. I'd like to call upon the last speaker of the round, government reply here.
Give me a few minutes to organize my note. Sorry.回答。OK OK OK。OK OK OK OK。illegal すぎる。I will start my speech. The myth of resilience can be accessible in the server house, but the capacity to be resilient to the extent you are required is not accessible. You need to be masculine, healthy, and white. The first thing I want to talk about is empowerment of like opposition case. 3 things to point out. First of all, exclusivity check. The fact that I would like, it's quite imaginable. The fact that you did not give up can be also like empowerment. For example, you can award someone who didn't give up against the inevitable hardship, but also in opposition, so we also have the mental support with another mechanism, that is we give this some room to like people who are in hardship by saying that, oh, you can give up and you have somewhere to escape, and that is also kind of some sort of mental support. Therefore, in terms of mental support, I don't think their empowerment case have exclusivity. But second, the premise of I would doubt the premise of their side. That is, if social media narrative is good or not. Opposition said, oh, this can be empowerment, this can be hope for people. Really, government said like what you refer to is, for example, the TikTok the contents or like Instagram contents made by the influencers and of like hardworking models and so on, right? And this is fulfilled by the survivorship bias, and you can't have the in that case you can have hope, and you will rather blame yourself and for not doing like making effort as like influencers do, and you will rather lose hope for seeing someone who are making much more harder like effort, and you will feel more like less compared to the kind of influencers. And what op can save, and but last third of all, at best, what op can save is those who have resilience like influencers. But op still the double punish those who cannot have the resilience as like as like influencers have and so on, right? But while government can save like what uh, but government can save those people as well. But you have, by saying that you have done enough, then take a rest. The winning here is simple. What we are saving is people who we are saving is more vulnerable, and we can like save people in a more miserable situation compared to opposition side. But last of all, even if this doesn't work, even if this narrative work as coping mechanism, as opposition said, as short term, opposition narrative solves nothing, but we solve something. So what's exclusive on government side? The first thing exclusive is the pressure to take to make a systematic change in also the house. The deal, what DLO have told us was just a mitigation. For example, how we can detect the problem if we leave. Then we already explained the incentive of, for example, corporations, because they want to keep employer more longer, and therefore I think they have massive incentive to do so. But also they said this is not accessible for poor people because anyway they have to work. But assuming narrative of giving up is prevalent on also the house, this also influences companies which hire poor people, assuming poor people. Therefore, I think they are also in the scale, in the scope of our case. But this is good because this is necessary. Our case is necessarily logically prior to their case because we solve the problem itself. Then, nextly, what's exclusive on the government side? The second thing exclusive on government side is death, because the people are in a race to the bottom until you get a mental illness. And opposition response were wild. They said, it's impossible to keep working when you are fatigued. And also we have knowledge to avoid this. Then why so many people are dying in Japan? And but second, they doesn't respond to our nuance. That is, people deceive themselves to make efforts because they are pressured to do so and they feel justice to do so. The winning here is simple. First of all, this our case is more irreversible because mental illness you cannot like cure fully, and also you cannot go back before you have that kind of mental illness. But also on linguistic level, in the case of empowerment, they didn't like clarify what happened if we don't have like empowerment. And also, but lastly, on the scale, because we people die, people feel nothing. At least there's the house, people do something. It's much more better on the house. But lastly, on the minority, they said people will give up and people won't speak up. 時間か。はい。
All right.
We win.
Thank you very much for the speech, and thank you very much, everyone. Reminder that this is a silent round. There will be no OA, so the bidder feel free to leave the room, and the judge stay here for the deliberation. Thank you, and good luck for breaking announcement.